Chiro Hustle. Sit back and learn from the greatest influencers in the profession on the world's #1 chiropractic podcast. Before we dive into this powerful episode, please remember to subscribe to our channels and give us a 5-star rating on iTunes to continue hustling. This episode is brought to you by Excite Medical and the DRX 9000, Chiro HD, Softwave, Bridge Financial, 100% Chiropractic, Chiro Health USA, Imaging Services, Chiro Moguls, The Chiro Speaking Company, New Patients in a Box, Pure Chiro Notes, Titronics, Sherman College of Chiropractic, Life Chiropractic College West, Pro Hockey Chiros, Pro Baseball Chiros, and the IFCO. You can benefit from our full list of sponsors by visiting our sponsor page at chirohustle.com/sponsors. Links in the description. Now, let's hustle.
Hey guys, welcome to episode 625 of the Chiro Hustle podcast. I'm your producer, Luke Millette, and here's your host, James Chester.
So today we had the opportunity of interviewing Dr. David Traster. And if you want to hear us discuss neurology and research, stay tuned for the full episode. Welcome back. This is another episode of the Chiro Hustle podcast. It's a long time coming. David Traster and I are on for our first interview, and I'm really excited about the opportunity. I connected with this guy almost a decade ago, and we've been in network with each other quite some time. So we're going to unpack and pack and maybe change some of your perspectives on this beautiful profession of chiropractic in a very functional way. And we're going to be talking about the brain, neurological chiropractic research. This guy was with the Carrick Institute. He's got 4 clinics, a couple different states, and background in small business and hospitality. And he gives free talks, which I'm really excited to have him kind of unpack and why his big why around that. And the big why for both of us is to help more people. When I first got into chiropractic, the doc on day 1 told me my job with him is to help more people. And it's now in my subconscious that that's the path of life that works best for me, is to help more people. I did a sweat lodge colonial Mexican sweat lodge on Sunday night. And my mantra that they asked me what I wanted to come away from this with is I was like, I want to figure out how to help more people. It was a great breakthrough. We can talk more about that if you're curious about it. But the chiropractic method with the brain, we're going to talk about the history, science, philosophy, and art. And gosh, it's going to be a dynamic conversation today. But before we get into our episode, I know I'm a little long-winded with this introduction. I can't wait to get to the part where we get to talk about what you're into. But I have to let people know our big why. We believe in freedom of speech. I think that that's probably one of the most important things that anybody could have a belief system in and actually do something about it and actually take action upon it. And that's what we do here. We know what it's like to be traffic throttled, shadow banned, censored, and I would never do that to anybody. I let everybody have their own voice, and that's really powerful. And that's probably why our show is doing as well as it is because everybody has the opportunity to share what is innate to them. We believe in medical freedom and family health freedom. If you don't know what those deep topics are, go find a chiropractor and talk to them about what to do with you and your family's health. Medical freedom is not the same as family health freedom, but they're quite similar. But a chiropractor can guide you with how to take care of yourself long-term. BJ Palmer's last words were the sacred trust. If you don't know what that is, please go to the show notes and check out what BJ Palmer's sacred trust was. You're going to know more about chiropractic than you ever did in your entire life. I guarantee you, and you'll understand why chiropractors do what they do. And then we have 3 more things. We support subluxation-centered chiropractic. I know I shouldn't have to say that, but they're removing that from the schools. Shame on them. And we believe in innate intelligence and universal intelligence. And we believe that when man or woman, the physical gets adjusted, it connects to them to man or woman, the spiritual. And they're removing that from the schools too, so shame on them. And with that being said, let's hustle. This is episode 625. Welcome to the show, David.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you know, like I shouldn't have to say those things before we actually have a show. But I think that there's a lot of disconnect with how chiropractic is today and how it was when we first met each other.
I think too that like we are just talking about, what you described has been a battle throughout hundreds, if not thousands of years. Like nothing
Mhm.
has changed, right? And so even when you look back at like vitalism, there's always been a mechanic approach to the body, looking at breaking it down to the smallest atom, and everything could be explained by chemistry and physics and biology, versus more vitalistic approach, right? And we look at more vitalistic approach, that there's some type of spirit or solar energy that kind of controls the being, right? And that's unique. And this has been the argument throughout history, right? Aristotle had his views on things, and people had different views on how this whole thing worked. But when you look at like the mid 1600s or so, things kind of got flipped with Descartes and went into more mechanistic. And when Descartes came in around that time, it really disrupted the vitalistic camp, because vitalism was the thing, right? It just, how does it happen? Like back in Aristotle thought that it happened in the blood, right? So he thought the blood was everything and the brain was actually in the heart, right? So he thought the heart was the center of all thought and cognition, and he thought the brain was almost like an air condition. It just cooled the blood, right? So his whole thing was about that. And then that transitioned into more nerve theories going through the nerves. And it was much more about spiritual energy, right? And saying the brain has a spirit, like an animal spirit, that contracts and fires through the whole nervous system. And then that then contracts muscles, and it's this energy or vitalistic spirit that kind of controls everything that flows, right? And you start looking at that mechanism, and that led into like even like the late 1800s, early 1900s, before they even found a neuron or a cell in the brain. There was a theory called the reticular theory. And the reticular theory in the late 1800s, early 1900s, by a guy named Golgi, who's the one that stained the first neuron, he thought the brain was like a one connected tube that sent information through these tubes. And it led also this idea, if it's a tube, it could be energy, it could be life force. And that led into a lot of the chiropractic history and philosophy of subluxations and affecting energy and life force. It came out of this reticular theory and this vitalistic approach that made sense in the reticular theory based on what they knew. And then what we threw everyone upside down and where we are today. And it doesn't mean there was not other things going on, right? But where we are today is a guy named Cajal came, and he looked a little differently at these different microscopic, different kind of stains with a different stain. And he found a synapse. So he found that these things are not connected, right? And so he found these cells are not connected. And then a guy named Sherrington came and said the brain has what's called an integrative state. And the activity of the brain actually dictates function and behavior. And then the question becomes, to one of your points, is does a chiropractic adjustment somehow release innate or spirit? Or are you improving the nervous system, which is the operating system of the body, and allowing it to function better? So whatever force controls us, whether you think it's innate or whatever your cup of tea is, or what are we doing as a chiropractor? Because I think if you think we're a doctor of the nervous system, and I think it's a good thing to kind of know more about the nervous system in 2024, because when you look at philosophy and science, they're both super important, but they have completely different purposes, right? When you look at science, science only wants to know if it's true or false. That's it, right? And that's what it wants to know. Based on this research, is it true? Is it not true? And it doesn't always tell you the truth, because you can dictate science a lot of ways, right? It depends on the questions you ask. It depends on the method. It depends on your statistics. But at the end of the day, assuming all things are positive and kosher, right, we're going to assume that research and science is about what's true and what's false. Philosophy doesn't really care about what's true and false, right? Philosophy is all about trying to make sense of things we don't understand, right? So philosophy is more about, does this make sense or is this nonsense, right? Does it not make any sense? And what we want to do is try to understand the science of today as well as we can, compare it to all the things that we don't know, because we still don't know more than we know, right? So this idea that follow the science, we know everything, obviously is nonsense, right? So it doesn't make sense. So there's a lot we don't know, and say, okay, as a chiropractor in 2024, We are on the verge of the biggest evolution of neuroscience the world has ever seen. In the 60s and 70s was more about cardiology, and it's blown up. And the average age in the 1900s was like 50, right? Now it's closer to 80. And a lot of it's due to cardiology, right? We're about to see that with the nervous system. And chiropractors are uniquely placed to really be ahead of the curve. But if we can't understand it, speak the lingo, and communicate, we're going to be left behind by other people that are going to copy us. And even if they don't do it as well, they're going to be in the clan, because eventually there's going to be other methods that are going to help people, and we'll always be chiropractors, but we have a position now to really understand what we do and position ourselves better if we want, right? And you can make it subluxation based, because let's talk subluxation for a second. Everyone's got different ideas, concept, theories. Here's my question I would pose to you. And like we talked about, I don't want to convince you of anything. I'm not trying to convince you. We may agree, may disagree. That's cool, right? The idea is we have the same belief, we have the same purpose, and we're on the same team, right? And we're here to help people, so we've got no reason to argue. But when you look at a subluxation, classically, a subluxation is seen as almost like a thing in the spine, where it's a kind of, it can be, depending who you talk to, a vertebral misalignment. It could be an energy blockage. It could be, this depends on the person and your flavor of what it is, but we know if we adjust the spine, a lot of people get better, right? And so we understand that. Here's the real question, which I find intriguing, and this will be a question to you. Theoretically, we all learn that subluxations are caused by thoughts, toxins, and trauma, right? And so let's remove physical trauma out of it, right? You don't get hit in the neck. You don't get hit in the back. The question I would pose is, how would a thought, for example, or a toxin manifest first in the spine versus, let me say it differently, I would make the case in 2024, and I'm not trying to tell you this is true, I'd make a case in 2024 based on the science that subluxation is actually in the neuron, and it's the communication of the neuron. And a subluxation is actually the miscommunication in brain cells, which then has secondary effects in the musculoskeletal system. And I would make the case that the subluxation, unless you get hit with a physical trauma, the subluxation might not be causing things. It might be the first indication of a nervous system dysfunction. And chiropractors might actually be on the track to actually identify nervous system dysfunctions earlier than anybody else. And by adjusting them, because the brain and the body work two-way, by adjusting them, you're working on the brain that has a dysfunction, right? If I want to know where my hand is in space, I need the area of the brain that controls my hand to know where my hand is, which means the muscles, the joints, and everything fires that area. And so if I've got a problem in my brain with my hand, I can do therapies to my hand. It's going to integrate to the part of the brain that controls my hand. And so if I've got a nervous system dysfunction, which secondarily leads to spinal dysfunction, and I adjust those dysfunctions very specifically to what I find, I'm going to specifically activate their nervous system. And because the nervous system controls all functions, all beliefs, all thoughts, all movements, controls everything, right? And so if you can create better connectivity, you can improve better function, right? And so that's the question that I have for people. It's not what's right or wrong. It's in 2024, if we understand that maybe a subluxation could be a dysfunction of the neurons in the brain, all of a sudden a thought can definitely do that. A toxin can definitely do that. A trauma to the brain can definitely do that. And you immediately see these things in the spine, right? And you immediately do right away. It's one of the first things you see. And chiropractors could palpate better than most people. And we could adjust more specifically than most people. And when you look at you've got about 640 muscles in the body, give or take, right? And these muscles are all different, but every muscle has its own unique cell and its own unique pathway, right? And so while upper cervical care is amazing and it can do a lot, there's also great things about other care, right? So chiropractic has so many amazing techniques that work so well. We've been spoiled and fortunate to not really have to understand things, right? Because the techniques are amazing. The art is amazing, right? And that leads us to the science versus philosophy, because all of us can believe different things, have a good technique and get good results, and feel like the results are reflected over our beliefs. And for some of us, that might be true. For some of us, it might not, right? Because we're doing polar opposite things, getting good results. And the question more to me is not arguing about what's different, because that's what most people do, The question to me is, what can we find commonality between us? How we can interrelate, how we can communicate, how we can grow as a profession, how we can keep our philosophy, how we can keep what's important to us, but also embrace science, because like you said, it's important to be uncomfortable because people don't like to be uncomfortable, right? You look at free speech. Free speech theoretically is the freedom to allow people to say things that make you uncomfortable, right? And so when you look at education, look, I don't know if you ever heard the story of a guy who invented the hand wash. He didn't invent hand washing, but you ever heard the hand washing story?
No, I haven't.
It's a famous story. Long story short, there was a guy, and I think it was in France. Again, I don't know the story of detail, but more or less, you can check me on it. He was in France, and there was a hospital who had like a 18% death rate. Like it was high, you know. And then there was a kind of a church, and they were kind of down the road, and they weren't killing many babies at all, right? It was super low. And so they bring this medical doctor, I think he was from like Vienna, and they bring him over and they say, figure this out. So he looks at the medical doctors and all the doctors in the hospital. And this is like probably like the 1700s or so, you know, late 1700s, I think, somewhere around that time. And he looks and all the doctors have blood everywhere, blood on their hands, because they just came from surgery, and blood was seen as like a sign of respect and authority, right? So they'd walk in the room with blood everywhere and they're like, look at me. The nuns obviously weren't doing that. And so this guy pretty much says, start washing your hands, clean your clothes. And what happened was, pretty soon when they started cleaning their hands, cleaning their clothes, and delivering babies clean, the death rate went down and they were about the same. So what do you think they went to him? I think his name was Semmelweis. I think it's called the Dr. Semmelweis, so Semmelweis effect. So Semmelweis, they said, thank you very much. They sent them back to Vienna and they started doing the same thing again, started killing babies again, right? They didn't listen at all, right? Their social idea and concept was overriding. Their psychology overrided the facts, right? And so he started writing letters to the editor and to researchers being like, this is what I found. This is what needs to happen. So what they did is, the medical community at the time, they invited him out to lunch without telling him it was an insane asylum. And 2 weeks later, he died beaten to death. It took another 30 to 40 years before they stopped till they started washing their hands, right? So it took decades after that before they started washing people's hands. So even in education, it's really difficult to change paradigms. It does it, whether it's chiropractic, whether it's medical. People are built into their philosophy, and it takes decades to change even things that can be true, because it makes old paradigms uncomfortable.
Can I go back to some of the things that you mentioned?
Go back to whatever you want.
Most profoundly, this subluxation conversation, and then the science part of the original conversation. And
Let's talk.
I think you're spot on with a lot of what you share with me and with our audience. And most important, what I've learned is it depends on who's funding the science is what they look for and what they publish. And philosophy, it's the bedrock of this profession. Chiropractor number one, if you want to know what chiropractic is, go ask D.D. Palmer. Everyone else after that is an adaptation to what D.D. originally founded. So if we want to learn what real deal chiropractic is, you have to go back to chiropractor number one and find out what that man originally established to where it advanced to where it is today. And I think you are right when it comes to all the tools and methods that we can have to understand brain cell, neuron, neurological patterns, subluxation. What is a subluxation? How does it happen? Does it happen only through the 3 T's, thoughts, traumas, and toxins? Is it physical, chemical, emotional? Is it stress? What is it? Is now technology the big subluxator? Like, what is happening to the physiology of the body, and how does it adapt, or how is it destroying itself? And how do we find where the missing link is within 2024, as you've mentioned a handful of times? How do we find the problem at source and correct it, and allow chiropractors to practice with their art, which is based on the fundamentals, which I always go back to it. Like, you can't have a chiropractic profession without the fundamentals. And if you start removing the fundamentals, it's not chiropractic anymore. It's something else. So, baseline analysis, we have science, philosophy, and art of chiropractic. we've been told 3 things cause a subluxation: thoughts, traumas, toxins. There's the stressors, physical, chemical, emotional. And now we have technology, which is like the far end of the spectrum that people have yet to actually understand, like how much technology is affecting the eyes, the ears, the sensory, the systems, the communication systems. Like my buddy's got a kid that won't get a driver's license at 16. He doesn't want to drive. He wants to sit and play video games all day. I'm like, bro, I'm just being honest. The kid isn't going to get laid. Like the kid isn't going to like reproduce. The kid isn't going to have experiences. He's not going to go have like a regular, like 16-year-old life. Like, what is it? How have we devolved into this world where a 16-year-old doesn't want to have independence and doesn't want to go experience life? And that's the massive subluxation I have there right now, is the disconnect and the isolation.
So let's talk about that for a second, okay? I'll make the case that our nervous systems are weaker and less resilient than ever before, at least that I know of.
Right? I believe it.
Right?
I believe this case.
Neurodevelopmental disorders are through the roof. Neurodegenerative disorders are through the roof. Neurotraumatic disorders are through the roof. And so if we just had neurodegenerative disorders, I'll hear the case that people are older now, like I told you. So we're dealing with more diseases of aging, because the biggest risk of a dementia is age, right? You're not getting many dementias at 20, right? So typically the older you get, but you also have developmental disorders, more concussions. So overall, more dysautonomias. Overall, it seems like we're getting more fragile. So when you look at the nervous system, your nervous system starts in development with a few hundred cells, right? And what's called a neural plate. And those few hundred cells then develop into 86 billion brain cells and 86 billion immune cells. So a couple hundred cells turn into a couple 100 billion cells, both brain and immune. And how it works is you've got 3 areas or so in the human brain that create new cells when you develop. And then the immune system, called these radioglial cells, almost create like a spider web, right? And they kind of create almost a map of where the brain cells then migrate to. And it creates a layer of the brain. And then your brain then starts connecting to areas that are hardwired. The most myelinated, again, it takes a while to myelinate, but the most myelinated, fastest pathway in the human nervous system is the pathway that goes to the human spine, right? It's called your vestibulospinal pathway, and it also goes up to your eyes. And it's called your MLF, your medial longitudinal fasciculus. It's one pathway. It's the strongest and fastest pathway we have, right? And it deals with the spinal musculature. And so when you look at how the brain develops, the third phase is environmental stimulation. So what's really cool is they've done research with like rats. And in case you didn't know, the back of your head and the brain, the occipital lobe, typically deals with vision. Your temporal lobe typically deals with sound. If they get to the rat before any environmental stimulation and flip a nuclei, they can make the back of the brain be a sound center and the side of the brain a vision center. And so you're pretty much the last phase of development. All these cells are pretty much like waiting for the environment to tell them what they do. And then they specialize. So if you remove those nuclei after they specialize, then you're blind and deaf. It doesn't work. And so the environment has a big deal to do with us being human. Most animals, they're up walking and living life in a few days to a few months. Most human beings are non-functional even at 10 or even at 16, right? So people think about that. It's like a bird not leaving the nest until they're about to die. So people are getting less functional. And I think you have to question, we know the amount of chronic disease is going up, right? We know it. I think last I saw it was almost 1 out of 5 person has a chronic disease that can't be cured by medication or surgery. And I think half of those people are on at least 2 medications for the rest of their life, right? And so that's only going up. We know with the baby boomers and everything, we're going to get more dementias. It's going to triple. Also, Alzheimer's is supposed to triple in the next few decades, right? So we know that's getting worse. And so the question is, what is happening? And I think you've got to question everything and start from day one. And my personal opinion is we live in a very fear-based society. And so from day one, we're pushed to make decisions based on fear. And so you've got to look at what is our environment surrounding us and how is our brain developing and why are there so many autoimmune and immune conditions nowadays, which seem to be prevalent throughout society, right? And I think you've got to question all that and say, what is the research? Is there research to suggest that that's normal or that's healthy? And if there is or if there isn't, as a society, you've got to remove your personal opinions and what you believe to be true. And you got to say, are we moving in the right direction? And if you think we're not moving in the right direction, we need to create a philosophical model of why not. Try to ask the right questions of what is going on, how can we prove it's not going on, and then do the science to show it, right? That's in today's society. Unfortunately, that's the only way that people have respect for. And even then you can be attacked and defunded.
You made it to Chiro Hustle. Sit back and learn from the greatest influencers in the profession on the world's #1 chiropractic podcast. This episode is brought to you by Excite Medical and the DRX 9000, Chiro HD, Softwave, Bridge Financial, 100% Chiropractic, Chiro Health USA, Imaging Services, Chiro Moguls, The Chiro Speaking Company, New Patients in a Box, Pure Chiro Notes, Titronics, Sherman College of Chiropractic, Life Chiropractic College West, Pro Hockey Chiros, Pro Baseball Chiros, and the IFCO. You can benefit from our full list of sponsors by visiting our sponsor page at chirohustle.com/sponsors. Links in the description. Now, let's hustle. Well, you're doing a lot here for me personally. It's very seldom that somebody takes me to school on methods of rethinking a lot of my positions. And it's great. You know, I think the greatest thing that we can ever do is learn. And that's why I do this show. I never made it about me. I make it about the guest. But just to give some clarification to people, there's over 9 million medical doctors worldwide and less than 100,000 chiropractors. And I think when people think about the numbers, I used to always tell people, people lie, numbers don't. Until 4 years ago, now numbers lie and people lie too. So now we're in this mixed bag of a bunch of lie, and we have a bunch of whoever's paying for it gets published, and whoever has the objective of what they want published gets done based on funding. Or like you said, you get defunded if you tell too much truth. And I think that there's some concept early on to what I was approaching, which with the 16-year-old, I've seen some speakers over my life. I've been to probably more seminars and conferences than most people, and I pay really close attention. And there was a profound talk that I saw at California Jam, probably back in 2017 or 2018, and this lady was talking about digital dementia, and she was talking about nursing home posture and how we're devolving with our posture set. And we start at younger ages getting bone spurs on the cervical curve, and we're losing the cervical curve, which as I know, I came up in the chiropractic biophysics world as a traction tech, restoring cervical curve to people and putting curves back into people's spines or pulling curves out of people's spines. Very mechanistic, but very effective. And what I learned over that time was that was called the arc of life. So if we lose that arc, which is the beautiful curve, which is, I believe it's the curve of the neck is 32 degrees or something. So if we have the ideal curve in the neck, then we have a longer quality of life, better vital lung capacity, better neurogenesis, and we have ability to adapt. If we don't, we get the autoimmune conditions. We get sick more frequently, whatever sickness is, whatever you want to call it, but the body doesn't adapt. We become stagnant and sedentary, and where there's no flow of life, where there's where something is stuck, there is no life. And I think that life is motion. That's what I've been told, at least. And when you put motion back into somebody's spine, you give them their life back. So if we look at like everything you said and everything that I understand, the biggest thing we can ever do is restore somebody back to functionality and help them with their posture distortions, which helps them think clearer and have more motivations and more self-esteem, which will have a long-term impact on their quality of life and their quality of health.
So let's talk. I actually lost you. You're black on me right now.
Yeah,
I don't know if you see me.
I can see you. Some reason my camera popped off. Let me try to turn it back on.
You just let me know when you're ready. But
I can hear you.
Let's talk about that, right? So the question becomes, I don't disagree with anything you said, right? And then the question really becomes, if that is true, and I believe that's true, but let's just take an independent bystander, right? If you to believe that's true, let's talk a little bit about how you have a curve, right? You obviously have certain bony structures, but as a live human being, these bones are really dictated by muscles, right? And when you look at the muscles of the spine, muscles can be contracted 3 different ways by the nervous system. It can be a volitional contraction where I want to move my hand. It can be an oscillation like breathing or walking, or it can be a reflexive contraction like I'm falling and I reflexively fire muscles to balance myself. So when you look at muscles of the spine, these are all under reflexive control. We can't control them. If we can control the muscles of our spine, there'd be no chiropractors. I would just say move C1, right? Like these are reflexive muscles. We've got other muscles that are more superficial we can control. So then the question is, if those reflexive muscles are now in better position to keep the spine at a better curve, how did that happen? And what's interesting is when you look at the midline cerebellum and certain areas of the brain that are associated and connected to that area, the midline area of the brain and the more middle areas of the brain are the more reflexive, the older. And so that's also parts of the brain that deal with the autonomic system, your emotional system, your eye movement balance system, and your immune system, right? And so it's interesting, you look at muscle, let's just talk about that real quick. About 400 million years ago, you had a jellyfish, right? And jellyfish only cared about, they no real eyes, they care about translating, forward, back, side, tilting, right? That type of thing. That's all they cared about. And then about 100 million years ago or 200, you got fish. And fish developed eyeballs and spinal musculature. And that's the beginning of this reflexive spinal musculature that we even have as humans. And you have this reflexive activity of the eyes, the inner ear, because now they have canals, and the spine. And so humans forever are linked with their spine, their eyes, and their inner ear. And the goal is to give your brain a perception, because despite what we know about the brain, the biggest thing we know about the brain is it tells us where we are in space and where space is around us. And it allows our brain to interact with our environment better, which allows us to be more human, right? And so when you look at these areas, these are reflexively controlled. So every time you do an adjustment of the spine, you fire these midline areas, which then fire higher areas of the brain to then come down and then realign the spine. And so even if you're doing like a CBP model, which is like a real spinal alignment model, at the end of the day, even putting people in postural distortions over extended period of time reintegrates into the brain, because the brain, when you look from the musculoskeletal system, the signals it gets is stretch and tension, right? And so if you're stretching muscles and holding it, the brain's going to integrate that. And if you're adjusting different body parts, the brain's going to integrate that, and it's going to have different feedback to try to integrate your eyes, your head, your body, your feet. And because it's almost like you look at Heidi Horvath, which I know you know, right? And Heidi's done some cool research. I like quoting her on this research because she did research on elbow position, right? And it was kind of closing your eyes, tell me where your elbow is. And people who had subclinical neck pain and had quote unquote subluxations, right? They couldn't tell where their elbow was. And then she found there a subluxation. And Heidi's interesting because she theoretically just adjusts subluxations. She's not going in there just to manipulate the spine for the sake of it, right? And so she'll say, this is where the subluxation is. And after adjusting that, the elbow got back to 90 degrees. And then the question becomes, how does that happen? How do you have better elbow sense if you didn't touch the elbow, right? And my argument is with the brain, your brain's like a GPS. You really don't know where your arm or leg is. You know where your arm and leg is relative to your trunk. And you really don't know where your low back or mid back is. You know where it is relative to your neck. And your neck is a huge input to your brain as far as where your head and body are. And so you can do a lot of, if you've got a neck injury, you can throw everything off. Or you can adjust the neck and do things to the neck, and you can have a full body response because it integrates everything. But at the same point, if someone's got a bum elbow, they got a bum elbow, right? And so sometimes you got to treat a bum elbow, but it's amazing what you can do and what you can impact with a limited impact, because it's such an integrative phenomena. And then to go back to a point, so I like DD, right? So I think DD is super interesting. I like BJ too. BJ had a full science lab, right? If BJ were live in 2024, what do you think his clinic would look like? Right? He had a full, like it would be a whole, it would be more like I think what my clinic is, which is all types of equipment to track brain function and do different chiropractic services and track brain function, right? It's super interesting to see brain function improve from a chiropractic adjustment, right? But you look at Didi was doing magnetism, right? He was a magnetist, right? And the idea of magnetism back in the day was using magnets to move spirit around the body, right? So that's what we talked about with the spiritualism, the vitalism. Didi thought theoretically that magnets were getting people better by moving spirit around. But what's interesting is I got a good friend out in Denmark who developed a technique. It's a muscle testing technique, and it uses magnets. And he's actually doing research at the University of Denmark with neurological issues because he has good results and he could talk the talk, right? So he's now doing research looking at using magnets over the body, muscle testing and adjusting and different manual therapy, and showing improvements in brain function using magnets. So it's almost like a full circle, even though we're doing magnets in the 1800s, there's techniques in chiropractic that are still doing it, right?
What's old is new.
Mhm.
And I think that we're always going to find the biggest truth will always become the most focused. And I do believe that there is a lot of method to the magnetic healing that the first chiropractor was doing. And I don't think that people are wrong in 2024 for adapting to a practice model that's best for them and their learning as being chiropractors, from the perspective of the philosophy and art. But we always also can't remove where we've come from.
Without a doubt.
So the bedrock has been set, but we can, like you said, like your centers, we can make advancement. And one of the things I love most about where chiropractic has gone is it gets people better faster. And I hear people today saying, you know what? It's harder than ever to get people to respond to chiropractic, because I do believe that we have to advance the technique. And I do believe that we have to advance the way that we deliver it. Like, if you're just going to go and pop and pray and you're not doing like a Gonstead neural scan, or you're not doing a scan like a CLA, or you're not doing a Titronic scan, and you're not shooting x-rays, and you're not actually doing motion palpation and using those techniques together, I can see why people might not be getting good results from just the pop and pray methods or the flying sevens. And we have to be more specific and more exact, because that is where the burden of proof is. We have more accessibility to better technology, and people's bodies are not responding to just the old school methods. They are, but we know that the body is, like you said earlier, less adaptive, more sick, and under more stresses. And people are scared out of their damn minds. Like, we live in the fear-based model that it doesn't matter because we're all medicated, high on sugar, high on alcohol, high on drugs. Like, the thing is that the body's under more of a stress load with all these outside in perspective things that, yeah, I could see where an old school Gonstead adjustment might not be as effective as it was 30 years ago.
And what's interesting too is when you look at, like, people are the more unhealthy than ever before. Like, I've got very wealthy clients
because they're eating poison, they're drinking poison, they're breathing poison.
But they have so much at their hand and they aren't unhappy than people who had so much less, right? And I've got so many families whose kids have everything and they've never been more unhappy, right? And so, to go back to one of your points, when you look at our clinics, we have 4 clinics. One of them has been around for forever, right? So that has like a PT chiro side of it, and there's a chiro side, and they have PT over there, but they've been around forever. All of our clinics, realistically, we co-manage with chiropractors, right? So this is our business model, for better or worse. We adjust our patients who are here for why they're here, but we don't offer chiropractic services. We refer to chiropractors. Right. And so what we offer is we're more like a neurological consultant in our area, that when people and chiropractors have really difficult patients with neurological issues, we specialize in that, and we're chiropractors and we speak the same language. And we have the same philosophy. We just do other therapies that's brain healthy. Right. And we can adjust, but we don't want to be their chiropractor. We want them to be their chiropractor. And we want to see patients, give them things to do, and kick them back to the chiropractor. And so our clinics are more looking to be like integrative chiropractic specialty neurology clinics, Because that's why we don't even offer. You can't call us up and say, I want to come for adjustment. We'll say, I got a great chiropractor, honestly, across the road. We send them all to him. I go to him. So if that's what you're looking for, that's the guy to see, because we don't also want to be seen like we're trying to be in competition, because we offer just a completely different service. And although we adjust and love adjusting, we don't want to, it's different, right? I said, we see mostly post concussions don't get better. We see dysautonomia. We see tons. I teach around the world on vertigo and dizziness. Right. And so we see tons of that.
TBI.
All that stuff. Right. I have massive TBIs, mild TBIs, severe TBI. So like these are the things we specialize in from a more holistic chiropractic frame of how we can get the brain better without drugs and surgery. And then we manage people. And if they're ready to get adjusted, we'll adjust them here, but we're not going to be their everyday chiropractor.
And
right. We have connections, we refer to them and vice versa. Right.
And if I remember right, back several years ago, you were part of the Sidney Crosby recovery.
Yeah, that was how I got into it. Back in I thought my background, I had Lyme disease I got misdiagnosed with Lyme disease for 10 years, right? And so my dad's a pharmacist. I was completely in the medical model. Chiropractor helped me doing all types of crazy things I didn't believe in, right? I just went to chiro school. I didn't even visit. I just went, right? It helped me. I went everywhere. I was sick for over 10 years. It took me a few years to get better. And so when I went to chiro school at Life, he said, go to Life University. I went to Life, right? He was a Sherman guy. He said, Life is where you go at this point when I went. And so I went to Life, and I was happy I went, and I learned a lot. But out of nowhere, like I was more into techniques. I was like a technique junkie. I was like a seminar junkie. I was all about the technique. And then all of a sudden, my friends were in neuro, but I wasn't so interested. I had my own opinions about it. It wasn't something I thought vibed me. And then all of a sudden, Carrick showed up and started getting not just Crosby better, but like random people's grandmas, right? And he started getting a lot of people better, doing things I completely didn't believe. I spent 3 months watching him a lot, skeptical, thinking it's all a scam, because people were getting better just too fast, right? It was too crazy, right? I mean, Sidney Crosby, man, it took 3 to 5 days. He's back on the ice. He spent 9 months in a dark room, right? And so that was at Life University, right? Which is a whole different conversation. But so that's how I got into it. Eventually, I got bought into this idea that it's not necessarily what got me better with Lyme, so I didn't have the personal bias of trying to sell something that I was inherently biased with. And then B, it was way quicker, and I was able to control the patient, manage it way better, and it made way more sense in a chiropractic model than a straight functional model, like medicine model. And so all of a sudden, everything I do is our whole clinic is about neuroplasticity and changing brain function.
That's a perfect spot to stop. I know we're at the edge of our time. People are going to want to hear more from you. I think we should schedule a part 2.
Cool.
I think there's so much more that we can talk about, from the whole idea about running a business and your talks. I know there's a lot of stuff that we didn't get into because we got so expansive with like the method of why this profession's so amazing and why sometimes it's misunderstood, but why it's also very well understood. And the more that we can bring clarity to this conversation, the better for this profession as a whole. So I just want to acknowledge you and say thank you. Thank you so much for being so open and so fundamental with your approach, but also adapting to what the person needs. Because I still believe that chiropractic gets people better faster, like you just said. And it's a beautiful profession. And if people knew what we know, they would do what we do. And I think that that's an anchor statement for me, because a lot of times people say, I got to the chiropractor the last thing I did. I tried all this other BS, the pills, potions, and lotions. I let people stick things into me, cut things out of me, burn things out of me. And now here I am, bro. I'm here for you. Let me take care of me and be a miracle worker now. And it's like, okay, we'll do our best, but you shouldn't have been butchered up and drugged up and lied to for the past, decade of your life or 20 years of your life. And now you ruined your kids' lives. And anyways, we could get way down the path on that. But where can people go if they want to learn more about you or connect with you?
Perfect. So what you can do is, our clinic is Neurologic Wellness Institute. And you can contact me at dr.traster, Traster, at neurowellnessinstitute.com.
I'm my own Joe Rogan and Jamie, so I write everything down myself. So Neurologic Wellness Institute is the clinic brand name. and it's Dr.Traster or dr.traster at neurowellnessinstitute.com is the email address.
Yeah, and I'm happy to talk because I think we could spend time. What we tried doing is a very patient-centered model and trying to identify each patient. Like, we have no protocols, right? What we try to do is identify each patient, tell them what's going on. And from a healthcare hospitality standpoint, like I said, I'm happy to talk about how we try to, in a multi-clinic model, how we try to position ourselves and market ourselves and what we can do with that.
Yeah. Next time, let's focus on the talk and business management and hospitality.
Cool.
I'm going to put a big circle around that right now. Next talk.
Awesome. But I'm happy. Like I said, I love chiropractic. It changed my life. I come from the approach of not having an ego and just saying, how can we find the middle ground? Because so much of it's every profession, right? It's human psychology, right? It's not just chiropractic, it's just human beings. So how can you find the middle ground on different opinions and different beliefs and different agendas, and try to help this profession grow without all the nonsense,
Well, we accomplished a lot today, and I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate your willingness to share so openly about what you're excited about, because it got me re-engaged with new ideas.
Cool.
And that's really why I believe the show does as well as it does, is because I get a chance to get osmosis from all these amazing thought leaders and people that are, as they say, in the trenches. I get a chance to observe and to learn, and then I get a chance to build my brain trust, which is my knowledge base that I can then go out there and change the world with. So
Awesome.
This is episode 625 of the Chiro Hustle podcast. This is David Traster, and I'll close out by telling everybody what I always do is tell them, you're just one story away. Keep hustling. I'll see you guys on the next episode. Bye for now. We'll talk soon. Okay, David?
Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Doc.
Thanks for listening to Chiro Hustle. Don't forget to subscribe and check back next week to continue hustling.